a stretch of highway outside Belleville, Ontario, where winter presses down on everything. The kind of cold that dulls sound. The kind of night where headlights feel farther away than they are. Police officers stand along the roadside, stopping vehicles as part of a routine canvass. Nothing dramatic. No emergency alerts. No public warning. Just a slow, methodical process that rarely produces anything remarkable. Cars approach. Cars stop. Drivers answer a few questions. Most are waved through without delay. For hours, it's uneventful. Stay with this, because the case doesn't crack with a scream. It cracks with a detail. Then one vehicle approaches the checkpoint. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't rush. It doesn't hesitate. The SUV slows exactly when expected, coming to a smooth stop. The window lowers before the officer finishes speaking. Everything about the exchange feels practiced, polite, forgettable. The officer scans the driver's face. Calm. Alert. Composed. This is not someone trying to avoid attention. The questions are routine. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? The answers come back quickly and clearly. No contradiction. No irritation. No confusion. No defensiveness. Then the officer looks down. Not at the driver. At the tires. It's a small thing. Something most people would never notice. A pattern, a shape, a detail that would mean nothing on most nights. Earlier in the investigation, tire tracks had been documented near the home of a woman who hadn't returned. Photographed, measured, logged. Not proof, just procedure. Now, standing on the shoulder of the road, the officer recognizes something familiar. Not a perfect match. Not enough to act on, but enough to pause. When an investigation pauses, it's because something just became possible. The driver is asked for identification. He provides it immediately. Name, occupation, a position that carries authority, responsibility, trust. Everything checks out. No warrant. No alert. No legal reason to hold him. So the decision is made. The SUV is allowed to continue. The vehicle pulls back onto the road, tires disappearing into the darkness. Another car, another interaction, seemingly resolved. But this one isn't forgotten. Within minutes, a quiet conversation happens away from the checkpoint. Not a debate. Not an argument. Just an acknowledgement that something about that stop didn't feel finished. No one uses dramatic language. No one says suspect. No one says follow out loud. Yet unmarked vehicles begin to move. They keep their distance. They don't close in. They don't announce themselves. They observe. This wasn't an arrest. It was the moment the questions changed. At this point, nothing illegal has been proven. No accusation has been made. Everything happening exists in a narrow space between caution and certainty. And that space matters. Because from this moment forward, the investigation is no longer theoretical. It has direction. The driver continues on, unaware his movements are now being quietly documented. Turns, stops, timing. There is no confrontation, no dramatic reveal, no immediate consequence, just a silent shift. Because sometimes the most important moment in a case isn't when someone is taken into custody. Sometimes it's when the questions stop being about what happened and start being about who might know. This wasn't an arrest. It was the moment the case stopped being hypothetical. By the time police began quietly following that SUV, the name on the license carried weight long before anyone looked at evidence. David Russell Williams was a senior officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. A man who spent decades moving through systems built on hierarchy, clearance, and routine trust. In July 2009, he was installed as wing commander at Canadian Forces Base Trenton, Canada's largest airbase. The role demanded steadiness, discipline, dependability when no one was watching. He fit the expectation perfectly. Promotions on schedule. Reviews describing him as meticulous and composed. Colleagues later recalled a man who followed rules precisely and rarely raised his voice. And reliability matters. He had flown VIP aircraft carrying senior officials. These assignments were vetted. Clearances were ongoing. Irregularities ended careers. Nothing ended his. So when he gave his name at that checkpoint, it did more than identify him. It activated a story everyone already believed. And when institutions place their faith in someone, that faith becomes contagious. No criminal record, no unresolved complaints, no disciplinary flags, nothing that would justify holding him longer than the law allowed. And that's the trap investigators would later confront. Because trust doesn't just shape how we see people, it shapes what we fail to question. When someone holds authority, their presence answers doubts before they're asked. Their explanations sound reasonable before they're tested. Williams lived comfortably inside that space. Neighbors described him as quiet. Co-workers saw him as orderly. Nothing volatile, nothing reckless. And that invisibility wasn't accidental. It was reinforced every time someone thought, someone like him wouldn't do something like that. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you questioned someone who clearly belonged where they stood? So that night, when the SUV was waved through, protocol was followed. Nothing improper occurred. But something subtle happened beneath the surface. Investigators weren't just watching a vehicle. They were watching a contradiction. And once you see a contradiction, you can't unsee it. The story doesn't pivot here with a dramatic reveal. It tightens instead, quietly, methodically, because if this man wasn't what he appeared to be, then the danger wasn't obvious. It was procedural, patient, hidden inside normalcy, and the next warning wouldn't arrive as an alarm. It would arrive as something small enough to dismiss. Almost everyone already had. Almost. The first warnings didn't arrive as violence. They arrived as discomfort. A homeowner comes back and senses something is off. A drawer slightly open. Clothing moved. A room that feels wrong. Police document it. Questions are asked. And the same conclusion keeps surfacing. Nothing valuable is missing. No forced entry. No obvious point of access. That combination matters because police triage is built around visible urgency. Broken doors signal risk. Missing valuables signal motive. Assault signals escalation. These incidents offered none of that. So the files were logged and categorized as suspicious but not urgent. And crucially, they weren't connected. Different towns, different detachments, months apart, each jurisdiction seeing only its own slice. Here's the part that should bother you. When a crime doesn't fit a familiar category, where does it go in the system? At the time, it looked like coincidence. Later, investigators confirmed the warning was hidden in consistency. Quiet entry. No damage. The same types of rooms disturbed. The same absence of theft that made no sense. This wasn't chaos. It was control. And control blends in. Each report that ended quietly taught the same lesson. You can do this again. So it continued. And with every successful entry, the boundary shifted. This is the testing phase, not the spree. Because when silence follows something disturbing, it doesn't just fail to stop it. It teaches someone how far they can go. So here's the question that lingers. How many warnings can exist before they stop looking like coincidences and start looking like permission? What happens next doesn't arrive with urgency. It arrives with repetition. The intrusions continue with a consistency that only becomes obvious once you zoom out. Always at night. Same kinds of neighborhoods. Timing that feels deliberate. Not wandering. Selection. And repetition does something dangerous. It refines the behavior. Gaps between incidents narrow. The intrusions last longer. Presence inside the home becomes the point. Repetition doesn't just describe actions, it reshapes boundaries. By the time investigators aligned dates and locations, the picture didn't emerge slowly. It snapped into place. What once felt scattered revealed structure, and structure means intent. Here's the question that sits under this entire phase. If someone learns they can enter private spaces repeatedly without consequence, what do they learn they can do next? If stories like this matter to you, not for shock but for understanding how these crimes actually unfold, subscribing helps keep these cases told accurately. Because when stories disappear, patterns get missed. And now the pattern stops being paperwork. It becomes personal. Up to this point, the case is files and maps. That ends here. Her name was Jessica Lloyd. She was 27. She lived alone outside Belleville. The people close to her described her as steady, consistent. The kind of person who doesn't vanish without explanation. That consistency is how concern becomes certainty. The silence starts small. Missed calls. No replies. Plans broken without warning. Then it hardens. Police are contacted. Her home doesn't offer easy answers. No broken doors. No shattered windows. No obvious scene of disruption. And that absence is disturbing. Because when a person disappears without visible force, the range of possibilities expands instead of narrowing. Hold on. This is where earlier minor reports stop being minor. Those earlier intrusions aren't anomalies now. They're context. If someone learned they could enter homes without being noticed, what happens when someone is inside? This question doesn't get answered yet, but it reshapes everything that follows. Because now investigators aren't just analyzing behavior, they're racing time. And the person responsible doesn't retreat. He continues. This is where most people expect panic. It doesn't come. Life continues as if nothing happened. The man investigators are monitoring doesn't withdraw. He shows up on time, composed, exactly where he's expected to be. Meetings continue. Schedules hold. Authority remains intact. From the outside, the image is stability. And stability creates assumptions. Here's the trap. The appearance of control becomes evidence of control. Investigators tighten quietly. Timelines align. Data accumulates. But he keeps moving through the world like nothing is changing. And each normal day reinforces the same internal conclusion. I'm still untouchable. That's the illusion. Because routine doesn't protect you from observation. It makes observation easier. So the question becomes unavoidable. How long can someone keep believing they're in control when the ground beneath them is already shifting? People later said there were moments they wished they'd spoken up. If something in this case stands out to you, say it out loud in the comments. Because what comes next doesn't arrive as chaos. It arrives as procedure. Investigators returned to tire tracks preserved in snow. At the time, they were just impressions logged because procedure requires it. Now they're re-examined with intent. Tread pattern, spacing, wear marks. The result isn't a name. It's a filter. And filters are how power shifts in an investigation. The list contracts. So investigators design a controlled test. A roadside checkpoint. Not dramatic. Strategic. Vehicles pass. Most dismissed in seconds. Then one approaches. The officer notices the tires. Not identical. Not definitive. Close enough to matter. The driver is questioned calmly, then waved through. This is the moment the case stops drifting and starts closing. Because this isn't about stopping him. It's about watching him. Surveillance begins. Movements logged. Timelines aligned. Every ordinary action becomes information. The net tightens one data point at a time. Measured, procedural, inevitable. And in the next phase, the shift isn't physical. It's psychological. Because the first thing to fail when a net closes like this isn't freedom. It's certainty. The interview begins quietly. No accusation. No confrontation. He sits with practiced ease. Straight posture. Neutral expression. This is someone trained for formal rooms. Answers come smoothly at first. Then the rhythm changes. Pauses grow longer. Breaths appear where there weren't any. Investigators stop listening for facts and start watching cadence. Questions continue, calm and procedural. Then his focus narrows. His wife, he asks how she's doing, what she's being told, what's happening at home, repeatedly. When pressure rises, people don't just react, they prioritize. His calm hasn't disappeared. It's working harder. Control becomes effort instead of instinct. And effort creates mistakes. Ask yourself this. When someone stops thinking about innocence and starts managing consequences, what does that tell you about what they already know? Because in the next phase, something enters the room that doesn't care about posture, tone, or rank. Evidence. Up until now, the investigation has narrowed probability without forcing a conclusion. But confidence can survive suspicion. It cannot survive proof. Tire tracks are examined again. Measured. Compared. Consistent with his vehicle? Boot impressions align. Location data aligns. Independent elements, verified separately, pointing the same way. Investigators don't accuse. They present, one piece at a time. And facts change the room. Pauses lengthen. Stillness becomes deliberate. Because denial no longer has architecture. This is where the illusion collapses, not with noise, with evidence. And once that barrier gives way, the confession begins. Not with theatrics, with acknowledgement. From here, the investigation no longer needs inference. It moves into confirmation. And here's the part that lingers. This ending didn't require a single dramatic mistake. It required patience. Details preserved when they seemed minor. Procedure followed when urgency was absent. So the question isn't whether the truth came out. It's how long the point of no return existed before anyone recognized it. The confession doesn't close the case. It releases it into the world. In court, the guilty plea locks the facts in place. Sentences follow. Then the consequences spread. The institution strips rank and honors. Not for drama, for boundaries. Communities keep living, but trust hesitates. Families carry permanence. And no verdict restores what was taken. Cases like this don't end with sentencing. They live on in families, in communities, and in silence. Sharing this story keeps the focus where it belongs, not on the killer, but on what was lost. The courtroom is still. Not the silence of suspense. The silence after everything that can be said has already been said. The legal process concludes. But completion isn't resolution. And this is the line that lingers. Where exactly was the line crossed? Not the obvious one. The earlier one. Between assumption and awareness. Between trust and verification. Between normal and unnoticed. This story does not end with a dramatic image. It ends with a responsibility. Because danger doesn't always arrive chaotic. Sometimes it arrives organized. Sometimes it arrives on time. Sometimes it arrives wearing the right credentials. So here's the question that stays when the screen goes dark. What part of this case stayed with you the longest? In the next video, I'm going to walk you through the interrogation sequence, step by step, including the exact procedural moves that made the confession inevitable, and the small preserved details that turned routine into proof. If you want more cases where public trust becomes camouflage, watch the next one right now.